Chapter 1, March 1950, San Francisco. His voice jolted Zoe out of her memories. Eyes fixed on the elegant bridge that arced over the Golden Gate, she recalled Uncle Yuan's words as they sailed into San Francisco Bay. Old Gold Mountain will give you a bright future. Chasing their destiny, Chinese had called San Francisco Old Gold Mountain since the 1840s gold rush. But Zoe knew she was different from the dreamers of 100 years ago. I'm seeking knowledge, modern science, and technology, not gold, she told herself. After the horror of the Japanese occupations and the chaos of China's Civil War, she'd been so happy in San Francisco. But after reading her father's letter, even the glorious March day, with the bay a sea of diamonds under the bright sun, couldn't ease her distress. Gloom descended, and her eyes filled with tears. What a beautiful city, but I must leave you. Darling, interrupted John, stretching his arm to tug her sleeve from where he lounged on the picnic blanket. Did you hear me? Auntie Lucy is already planning our wedding. She wants to know what your favorite color is, and whether you want an indoor or outdoor party, and what kind of music do you like. Today was their anniversary. Blinking back her tears, she forced a smile. Exactly 2 years ago, their impossible chance meeting had convinced her of the power of fate. After waiting nearly half an hour by the tennis court, she had given up on her friend when John had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. His athletic build, thick brown hair, intense gaze, and ready smile won her over instantly. I assume you're waiting for a no-show friend too. Why don't you and I play, so we don't waste the trip? She was already half in love with him. When she learned he was also studying at Berkeley, she an undergraduate in nuclear physics, he was researching nuclear isotopes for his PhD. She knew they were meant to be together. At first, he had looked after her like a big brother, guiding her into the master's program, making her laugh with his wit and optimism, and inspiring her with hope and ambitions for the future. For 2 months, the park along the beach was their favorite meeting spot. Then came the unforgettable day he kissed her in the swirling Frisco fog, assuring her that her Chinese heritage didn't matter to his feelings. She longed to make him as happy as he made her. The flowers, laughter, and love he brought into her life erased her homesickness and near constant worry for her beloved parents left behind in her war-torn homeland. Her finger gently traced his sculpted chin and lips. Firm and sexy, they always reminded her of the idealized figures in ancient Greek and Roman statues. He closed his eyes at her intimate touch, leaning back and pulling her down on the blanket next to him. She planted a kiss on his mouth, her firm breasts pressing against him, and at the provocation, his hand slid down, caressing her body. He felt his pulse rising. Darling, I want to make love to you right now, he whispered, nuzzling his way down until he found the warm place between her breasts. She laughed and looked around quickly. Here? Now? You're crazy. Okay, let's go back to my apartment then. He had one arm around her waist, her soft, feminine body pressed against his, and he breathed in her perfume, letting her long hair trail against his face. You are so sexy. I can't wait any longer. She pulled back, confused and slightly disappointed, as she looked at the food spread out around them. What about our picnic? John sat up, an impish grin spreading across his face. He raised his champagne in a silent toast, his eyes twinkling over the glass, and she realized he was teasing her. She pummeled his arm like a sudden rain shower. You cheeky monkey, you! He laughed. Her simple innocence never failed to charm him. He pulled her close again, deliberately missing her mouth, lips nibbling along her jaw up to her ear. It wasn't just her elegant femininity and allure. He felt he could rely on her moral character and determined will for the rest of his life. She pushed him away, pouting. Slowly, John sat up and put both hands on her shoulders, his expression sobering. "You've been so quiet today. Is everything okay?" Zoe tried to formulate a response, but found she could not bring herself to utter the words aloud. So often in the past week she'd imagined the right way to tell him, trying to convince herself that he would understand and continue loving her. Looking into his deep blue eyes, full of love, trust, and patience, the smile froze on her face, and she shivered. "Are you cold? The breeze is picking up." With a tender caress of the cheek, he draped a sweater over her shoulder before handing her a half-empty glass of champagne. "Let's drink to our anniversary." Zoe finished her glass in one gulp. She was not good with alcohol, especially champagne. However, the fire working its way from her throat to her belly seemed to give her courage. "If I tell you something now, you must promise not to be angry with me," she said, running her delicate fingers through his hair. "Go on," he smiled, thinking she was playing one of her naughty games. Her sweet but coy disposition was one of the things he loved about her. "Last week, I got another letter from my father," said Zoe, her eyes slowly probing his face. "He said that since the Communist Party took over and established the People's Republic of China last October, conditions have improved dramatically. The new government is giving poor people jobs and houses, and is cleaning up the brothels and opium dens. They've even promised a transparent and democratic political system made up of diverse voices. At Beijing University, Baba said that everyone in the mathematics department is enthusiastic about building a new, modern China." She hesitated, and then plunged on. "He wants me to come home, to be part of the change, so I—" She stopped suddenly, as John's lips compressed into a thin, tight line, and the joy drained from his eyes. But he was enough of a gentleman to let her finish. Her last words came out in a rush. "I've decided to go back to China as soon as possible." John turned away from her, his gaze drifting aimlessly across the cloudless blue sky. For the first time, Zoe noticed the crowds. It looked like half the population of San Francisco was in the park, enjoying the first warm day of 1950, oblivious to her misery. "What about us?" When John finally broke the silence, his voice sounded flat and emotionless. "I love you, no matter where I am. You know that," she kissed his cheek. "It's just temporary. You can join me in China soon if things go well. Otherwise, I'll come back here." "But you love San Francisco. You said you wanted to stay here." "I do. I love it almost as much as I love China. I found peace and happiness here, with you." "Then stay here, with me," John said, his voice tight with pain and passion. His fingers clutched at the grass, shredding the budding shoots. "I can't." Her voice throbbed with anguish, and she dropped her eyes, looking down at her hands clenched in her lap, unable to meet his gaze. John cupped her chin in his hand and raised her eyes to his. For a long time, they stared at each other without speaking, neither wanting to continue the conversation. Finally, he dropped his hand and turned away, watching a cargo ship on the horizon head toward the open sea as he searched for the words that would change her mind. He was familiar with her stubborn and independent spirit. Once she made up her mind, wild horses wouldn't change it. But he also knew her overconfident and idealistic nature could be her undoing, so he opted for a gentler approach. "Have you considered how this will affect your career? You have the best facilities and working environment in the world here. Your neutron research under Professor Simon will be groundbreaking in the nuclear science field. If you leave, all your effort will go down the drain. And how will you finish your master's degree?" She took a deep breath, looking away calmly. "I know the conditions there aren't comparable with what I have here. and I probably won't be able to continue my research. But I can teach at Tsinghua University, one of the top universities in China, and gradually build up a laboratory to continue at least the basic work. As for my degree, I think I can finish my thesis in the next month or so. My plan is to leave in about 2 months. She paused and looked at him, a small frown on her face. Though he still seemed deep in thought, she knew he was listening, so she continued, trying to persuade him. China was ravaged by wars for decades. The Sino-Japanese War and the Civil War turned China into a state of ruin. Now that the war is finally over, I should go back to help revitalize my country. After all, only a strong China will be able to throw off all that humiliation and begin to thrive again. Compared to what my motherland has suffered, my loss is nothing. But it's a communist regime. How can you trust it? She nodded slightly, acknowledging his point. I used to be afraid of the communists too. But I think it'll be okay. If the government is really building a better China, the way my father described, then I want to contribute something to it. She thought for a second and said gently to assure him, Don't worry. I will find out the truth with my own eyes. Don't you care about me? His tone shifted as his resentment surfaced. I do, she said, gripping his sleeve until her nails tore the fabric. But China needs me now, and I'm her daughter, no matter how poor she is. I need you too. I can't wait another 2 years to marry you. We will get married soon, I promise. This might even be a good opportunity to tell my parents about you, face to face, before our wedding. With each word she spoke, John felt himself becoming more and more numb, desperately trying to make sense of it all. At a loss for words, he forced himself to his feet. Memories of his marriage proposal just months ago flashed through his mind. He vividly recalled the moment when, standing in front of a wishing well, she'd tossed a coin into the waters below and softly whispered, I love you, and I wish that, for better or worse, we'll never be apart. They had mapped out their entire future together, from their careers to their children's names. Now, seemingly out of nowhere, everything had changed. No, it has to be a joke. Zoe won't cast our relationship aside just like that. She will change her mind if I try harder. John stared deeply into her eyes. I love you. We are destined to be together, inseparable. I can't take the risk of losing you. His voice started trembling. Zoe softly wiped his tears from the corner of his eyes with her fingertips, unable to stop her own tears from welling up. She had never seen John so sad, even in his most difficult moments, and she instantly felt guilty. Oh, darling, I'm so sorry. I would never hurt you. You know you're my life. Then please, stay with me. Let's get married and plan our future together, John said patiently, holding on to her hands tightly. His eyes filled with hope. Let's at least get married first, while we wait and see whether China is truly a safe place to live and work. I can even go with you if you're still set on going. For a while, Zoe stood silently, her eyes still fixed on John in deep thought. She then turned to the Bay Bridge and said calmly, I don't think there is time for me to establish a family here first, because the new government has already approached my father a couple of times, urging him to convince me to return to China, and Papa seems to be getting more and more impatient. I'm his only child, so he misses me. To him, Zoe's explanation seemed all too trivial compared to their love. However, clearly she had made up her mind. Zoe wants to leave. She loves her family more than me, and their words have convinced her when mine cannot. That's why she was making excuses, to delay our wedding. He suddenly felt like a deflated ball, incapable of producing any further counter-argument. Instead, he stood silently at the edge of the bluff, the buffeting gusts of wind threatening to tear his soul from his body and scatter the fragments over the water. He shivered unconsciously in the brisk air. Anger and jealousy swelled up in his chest, threatening to explode. He lit a cigarette and inhaled hard, in an attempt to vent his frustration and pain. After only a few puffs, the wind gathered speed around him, snuffing out the delicate flame. He exhaled, bitterly, squeezing the remainder of the cigarette into his palm, the burnt embers searing his skin. Heaving a deep sigh, he turned to face Zoe once more and said slowly, "You go then. Forget about our future." Zoe came to stand beside him, encircling his waist in her arms. She leaned her head on his back, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Only this time, John didn't turn to acknowledge her. "You promised you wouldn't be angry with me, but I can feel the volcano erupting inside of you." She made a kissing noise and teased, "Only my kiss can cool this rage." Her nimble fingers crept under his coat and tickled his armpits as she nibbled at his sleeve. Her cheeky play, so unlike any of the other scientists he knew, could always lighten his mood and make him laugh. But now, her whimsy had lost its power. For a long while he stood, as hard and unyielding as the rocks below him, and barely even noticed when she left.